I've been practicing law for 40 years, and there are very few new things that come down the pike. But rideshares, Uber or Lyft, is one phenomenon that's very complicated to deal with. And it has to do with the insurance requirements that the states make of Uber and Lyft that they very often don't want to adhere to. What we find is that different circumstances result in different amounts of money being available as insurance coverage. When you're in an Uber or a Lyft and you're being driven, there's $1 million in insurance coverage, and that is more than enough to take care of the bulk of cases. The problems involve when other statuses are in play. For example, when an Uber driver or a Lyft driver is not using the app at all, what kind of insurance do they have? Well, the answer to that is they have the insurance that they personally buy for their vehicle and nothing more. Another set of circumstances are when an Uber or Lyft or rideshare driver is using the app to get a ride but doesn't have a passenger yet. There's an entirely different set of insurance that comes into play then. It's sponsored by Uber and Lyft, but it's not nearly the $1 million that we come to expect. And so it is an area of the law more than almost any other, at least in our realm, that requires an attorney to go through all of the information and all the evidence and come up with a fair settlement. My client was a driver who had stopped at a grocery store to pick up some passengers, so he was using the apps. The passengers hadn't gotten in the car yet, so it made sort of a no man's land for where the insurance would fall. And he was putting their groceries in the trunk of the car when a drunk driver rear-ended the car and crushed him, ultimately losing his leg. And it was resolved for 7 figures, but it was one in which they did not want to provide the 7-figure insurance policy. Rather, they wanted to provide the state minimum, which in that instance was $30,000. And it took years of fighting with them and a certain amount of coercion on my part and on another lawyer with whom I worked on the case's part. But we ultimately got a good resolution for our client, who was really badly injured. I settled a case last year that had to go into a lawsuit and go through litigation, and it involved a young woman here in Prince George's County who was a passenger going to a restaurant, and basically the Uber driver made a U-turn in the middle of the road and a crash occurred. And then the question was what amount of insurance was going to come into play. And in this case, we managed to invoke the $1 million policy. She didn't have a $1 million injury, but she got a substantial 6-figure settlement, and ultimately justice was served. What happens often is that the driver who's driving for Uber or Lyft feels sort of protected to a greater degree than they really are. And so they get, for example, the Maryland minimum insurance, which is $30,000 per person and $60,000 per accident on their vehicle. And then they're caught in one of these no man's land between having a passenger or using the app, and it's a little bit ambiguous which is which. And their personal insurance doesn't want to pay for any commercial use of their vehicle, and Uber or Lyft or their insurers don't want to pay for the personal use of the vehicle. And so you can really find yourself in a situation where you have to file a lawsuit, you have to have a lawyer to get the facts down and to know exactly which insurance company was responsible and how much coverage they would have. If you've been injured in a rideshare accident, whether you're a driver of a rideshare vehicle, a passenger, or another vehicle operator who happens to come into contact with a rideshare driver, you absolutely need an attorney to ensure that you get the appropriate amount of compensation, because the insurance companies are out to reduce as much as possible what you get. And if they think they can pretend that the insurance isn't applicable to your particular accident, they've got another thing coming.